Good evening, Mayhemers. Well, I'm here tonight to start another special series in the Mayhem podcast, and that is Mayhem Discussions, where we'll bring on Mayhemers, both OG and new Mayhemers, to talk about topics that are hopefully interesting. Tonight's guest is an original Mayhemmer. Her name's True Heart, a very good friend of mine, so I hope you enjoy the conversation. True Heart is an OG Mayhemmer. She's a licensed clinical social worker from Austin, Texas. She is a self-professed Gnostic, Buddhist, and Christian. She blends concepts of Zen and other forms of spirituality to keep her grounded in a universe that she believes contains hidden messages which speak to us and lead to direct experiences that are otherwise difficult to define. The message that she's going to bring to us tonight is that it doesn't matter what you believe, as long as you believe in something. So without further ado, here's Mayhem's first conversation with True Heart.
Okay.
Hey Mayhemers, I'm here with True tonight, and she's going to give me a little bit of a schooling about Gnosis, which is something a little different for me. It's a little outside of my wheelhouse. In my younger life, I definitely explored a lot of different kinds of spirituality, but more from an agnostic perspective. I never really had that palpable feeling of knowing that people get, and even though I may have had some enlightening experiences, I guess I just don't know if they were agnostic, and maybe you can tell me about that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's something that each individual has to define and experience for themselves. So I don't think one person can confirm or deny gnosis for somebody else. I think that's one of the things that I find so challenging is um, finding a community of people where you can actually talk about this stuff because so much of it's beyond language.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the what we like to touch on in Mayhem, right? Is stuff that's really hard to define and stuff that's really hard to put your finger on. Can you give me sort of a general definition or an idea or an understanding, like a little bite-sized idea of what gnosis is?
Yeah, it's based on a Greek word for knowledge, but a lot of people like contrast it with faith. Like you can have a faith that's based on history or what somebody else tells you, or you can have this Gnostic experience, this experience gnosis, where you have a direct experience of, and then different Gnostic groups have different things they plug into that point. It could be a direct experience of God, it could be a direct experience of what's behind reality, or the like what I think of as like an ultimate field of being. Like if there were a creator, like I'm not going to ask our audience to go with me on this. I'm just talking about it as a possibility. If there is a creator, if there's a way, creator is kind of a noun, it's kind of a word that makes you think of a person, but I don't think that fits this. I think, ultimate ground of being is a better way of talking about it. This place of experience where, you know, that's a very long answer. This is probably rambling on. I don't
No,
know. I should stop and pause.
no. The more you talk, the less I have to fill the space. So go ahead. Um, so I guess when I'm taking what you're saying, and it's sort of that sort of direct experience. So would that experiences of like synchronicity or deja vu fit into that idea of gnosis?
It's really kind of fascinating, deja vu, and time. You know, deja vu can be interpreted as, if we want to talk about the movie The Matrix. I mean, it was a glitch in the Matrix when they had them. I mean, what if that's kind of a similar thing in our reality? What if there's some kind of, time is not linear? A lot of people talk about how time's not linear. What if there's some sort of wrinkle in time or some kind of skip or some kind of overlap or intersection of dimensions or something, and that's how we experience a deja vu? I mean, I don't think anyone has an answer for that really. So, but as far as my moments of gnosis or my moments of feeling like I've gone past this reality and touched some sort of ultimate field of being, it's there's a sensation to it for me that I experienced. I don't. Other Gnostics might have that similar experience. Some people touch on it in meditation. Some people touch on it in what might be controversial. I mean, all of it's controversial, I guess, but people that have these experiences where they feel like they're experiencing an anointing of the spirit. It's also very similar to some of my experiences of gnosis. So,
Well, I can remember when I was younger and I was kind of exploring sort of like that esoteric piece of like the Kabbalah and esoteric Christianity and things like that. I
mhm.
had several experiences where I felt like I was sort of perceiving the real-time actions of like divine forces and profane ones as well. And I called those quickenings because they were very um, short, brief, and time limited. So they weren't like something that lasted forever. It was, a week or two or a month at a time, and it was only at those times where I felt the most weak and the most powerless and the most vulnerable, coincidentally. And then within those experiences, I ended up feeling actually sort of a deeper sense of power. Um, would those qualify as sort of a Gnostic experience?
I think there's potential for yes there. I don't really think I can say yes or no, but I think anytime we have an experience where reality seems different than usual, like more or less, or, I think it's hard to explain those experiences. And so sometimes people use gnosis as a way to talk about it. Or,
Okay, and so gnosis is that general knowledge. It's that piece that you're directly experiencing, and it is very ephemeral, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it.
yeah.
So tell me about your background and sort of like how you came to identify as a Gnostic and what that's meant in your story in your life.
Well, actually, it's directly related to Mayhem. I started enjoying those discussion groups back in 2005 and on MySpace, and for the first time, allowing myself to the freedom to talk with people who studied Kabbalah. And I had grown up in a small town Texas, so pretty conservative background, pretty conservative Christianity, Lutheran, not the most conservative, but definitely some strict boundaries on what's safe and what's scary. And so online I could discuss these things with people that were thousands of miles away, and I felt perfectly safe just exposing myself to these concepts and these ideas. Plus, before then, the Matrix had come out, and that just really, for a lot of people, it blew our world open. There's this code. There's got to be, that's not just a movie. There's got to be something that this reality is based on. We can just sort of feel it. It's just, there's something, there's sometimes I get what I want. Just
There's
like,
that thing behind the veil, so to speak,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, just making friends with people in Mayhem and getting suggestions for what to explore. And actually, it was Spider who recommended I join a Sophian Gnostic group that was here in Austin. So I studied with them for about 8 years, and then the teacher had to move away. But it was really such a wonderful, playing with theurgy and yeah, just sort of having this desire to, learning what gnosis is and having this desire to experience it. And then on occasion, just having just sort of get hit with that lightning bolt of just that mind blowing, shattering, changing everything, all your perspectives to everything um, moments. And it's just like, oh, okay, now that was something. I think that was gnosis. I think that was it.
Well, because I mean, when I think about your story and how I know you through Mayhem, I think of esoteric Buddhist, Christian, Gnostic. I remember those particular sets of words being clumped together in you describing yourself at some point in history. Is that still true today?
Yeah, yeah. I really do like a lot of Zen, a lot of Buddhism. There we're talking about moments of gnosis or enlightenment. And there's a Zen priest here who I heard talk about a report that he read in the New York Times, and I haven't been able to track it down since, but something about how somebody had polled people on the street to see if they'd had one of those life-changing moments, gnosis, or I don't think they used the word gnosis, but something that just sort of shattered how you see reality and gives you a whole new perspective, including how we're connected to everything, those kinds of perspective changes. And about 90% of the public that they had polled had that kind of experience. So apparently it was something that a lot of people experienced, but when they were asked if they could have that experience again, or if they wanted to repeat it, only 5% wanted to have that experience again. So it's so life shattering that a lot of people don't like it and don't want it to happen again. And I've actually talked to multiple Gnostics, and I've had that experience myself too, where it's not always pleasant.
Certainly, I think for some personalities, that sort of an experience could feel addictive, right?
Probably. You're mentioning addiction. Did I hear you correctly? It could be addictive.
Yeah, I mean, I could see myself
Yeah.
jumping on it like that,
Yeah. I actually think personally that the point of addiction is that is that we have this, I'm trying to choose my words carefully, we have this opportunity to develop this relationship with God or the ultimate field of being, and that's what is satisfying, and that everything else, all these other things that we could get distracted by, are kind of missing the point. But that's just one perspective.
No, I hear you.
Yeah.
So, when I think about my own development and Mayhem and how sort of I've transformed through the years, when we first started, I was still pretty deep in sort of like 1 foot in the occult, 1 foot in futurist philosophy, and then sort of like poking over here at atheism a little bit. Like, hmm, you know, it could just be that the material world is all there is, and that's it. So then I ended up, at some point shifting into sort of a real hard empirical mindset, more of a, materialist, hard science guy for the longest time. And what that I found as I'm approaching my 40s, even though I still don't necessarily believe in a deity or a creator, I find myself trying to have it like sort of a deeper relationship with reality, with my life, with the universe around me, and finding sort of those deeper meanings and connections. So, I mean, I guess in my mind, it's still possible for someone who's atheistic to be spiritual in nature. It's something I'm sort of reconciling currently. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think certainly as working in the mental health field or looking at human capacities, I don't think you have to believe in God. I think you can be atheist and still want to like have self-actualization, or to develop and grow, to max ourselves out in our development. And I think, that we haven't even begun to tap into our full capacities. I think there's so much out there that we're capable of that we don't even know. That,
Oh,
into these
yeah.
realms of, I mean, people make fun of The Secret, and I don't really agree with all of it, but I think there is something to doing the mental pre-work before you head out for your day. There is something to imagining what you want for yourself. Somehow the universe brings it all together. And what is that?
Yeah, I mean, I see that too. I mean, and I think a lot of people, a lot of writers, a lot of psychologists, and other people try to sort of repackage that law of attraction, right, or whatever it is
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is in the secret. Um, and I got to be honest, True. I kind of suck at that. I sleep till 7:45 on my 8 o'clock workday when I have to go into the agency, and usually by the time I get there, I'm fairly conscious. Usually I have pants on, uh, mostly adult, human. I'm doing the thing that I'm supposed to, but usually I'm not even awake till about noon or 1 o'clock. I mean, that's kind of why I took this night job, because I thrive much more in these late hours than I do in the early part of the day. I tried, faking it for about 3 years. And then one day I just went to my boss and I was like, look, I need something different. And luckily they were willing to play ball with me. And it's actually been a really nice change. I've kind of been able to come back to some more creative and spiritual endeavors. And lucky for me, Mayhem has become a part of that again. I didn't necessarily expect it. I think it was really sort of a lucky intersection on Facebook that led to us all getting back together and getting things started again. So, I mean, what are your hopes moving forward with the group?
Oh, with the group, well, I think these podcasts are exciting. It's going to be interesting to see where they go. It would be, I would really like to see a group discussion in this kind of a context. And I'm not sure how to do it, or maybe it's not even desirable, but we talked about everything. We covered we didn't cover everything, but we talked about so much. And then we stopped because it had already been said. And I don't know. So obviously we can't recreate that, but it would be interesting. I don't know. That's kind of what I would like to just keep the conversation going. I'm not sure how to keep pushing the edges.
Well, I think that's what we have to do. We have to find the outer walls and see what we can do from there. Like, I think that at the time we had said all that we could say, but I feel like, I don't know if you really pay attention to some things that come on the internet, but I always think like, dang, we talked about that like 15 fucking years ago on Mayhem, and like the internet's just now catching up with us, and it's like, well, where do we go from here? And I feel like we've all aged quite a bit, and there's got to be some new understanding and life experience. I know I've gained a ton of knowledge since we stopped back in 2009, 2010, whenever we stopped.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to say, now that you're talking to me about this, I guess I can say that Mayhem for me was also a source of Gnosis, because I learned an awful lot about myself. I mean, I was 23 when I started that group, and it was just sort of randomly mixing minds and talent because I was at home a lot and needed something to really absorb my time. And you all helped me more than you'll even know when it comes to all that. I mean, that was some of the hardest years of my life. And without you guys, I'm not sure how that would have all turned out. So I just want to say thanks while we're at it.
It's not just me, it's all of us. I wish there'd be some way we could get, what was it, like a dozen or however many people were the main ones. But anyway, it's fun to think about.
So when I think of Gnosis, I think of a desirable endpoint, like some point of completion is when I envision it. Because when I think of agnosticism, I think of that unknowable piece. That's sort of where I've been at in my life is that I look at things as being not entirely knowable. So I've never identified as a Gnostic.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it look like when something is completely knowable?
That is the question, isn't it? Yeah. I think that as one practices, meditation, calming the mind, calming the ego, letting go of aversions and attachments, then they develop a skill to be able to sustain that state of consciousness or that awareness. I'm not there yet. I don't know that many people that are, but I think there's always more. There's not an endpoint. There's just more evolution,
So there's not really that much of a big difference between Gnosis and agnosticism.
Well, that's an interesting thing to say. Because I think there probably is. I mean, we wouldn't have the distinction if we wouldn't have the words if there wasn't a distinction, I don't think. But I think that you can't really sustain Gnosis unless you're asking the question, unless you're curious. If you feel like then you've killed something. You're leaving something out of the picture,
That I feel the same way, and to me, that's an agnostic sentiment. So when I think about that, I think about, okay, so if Gnosis is a transient state that you kind of pop into and then move back to some sort of a spiritual or perceptual baseline, do you then revert to sort of a default state of agnosis and then those meaningful points along your timeline? Is that what Gnosis is? Like,
I mean, I don't know that anybody can define Gnosis, but for me, it's more like there's faith and belief and trust in the moments that you have between the moments.
okay.
But it's asking the question about, well, what is that really that enables those moments to happen more frequently or more often or to be able to be sustained? Does that make sense?
It does, and I hope that it's making sense to our viewers too, because I mean this is a hugely subjective topic, and I think that maybe people that are watching are either going to know kind of where we're coming from, or they're going to be like, I'm listening to some word salad. What the fuck's going on here? And here's the thing, though: if you've ever been through any kind of a spiritual journey where you move from one faith or one point of knowledge to another, that sort of aha moment, that spark, that driving piece, that's that desire for gnosis, that's that desire for understanding and knowledge. And whether you identify as a Christian or a Buddhist or even an atheist, if you're still striving for that deeper understanding, then what you're striving for technically is gnosis, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And if you're just willing to be confused all the time, then you're an agnostic, which, that's me. So I guess kind of, thinking deeper on this piece of gnosis, is gnosis only an individual thing, or does it also happen in groups and populations? And if so, can we think of any examples in history where that might have been a thing?
Well, I don't know if other people feel this way, but I recently was studying with some conservative Christians who were, way into what they felt was, or what they believed and taught was an anointing by the Spirit or being filled with the Holy Spirit. And to me, that experience when I was with them was just like the moments I'd had of gnosis as an individual, or I've had some flashes of gnosis when I was in relationship with other people, just a handful of times, and which also brings in the Buber's theology. But anyway, so I think it's possible. And I've also talked to other people who, if you're in a room with people that are meditating, there's a whole nother kind of consciousness that's experienced by everybody in the room. And it's we could talk about similar vibrations and things like that. But I think it's possible to get into a field like I was just listening to your podcast on empathy and how we can. I think it's possible to get into that resonance, that limbic resonance, and get into some sort of cognitive field. We're in similar consciousness states, and so I think it's possible to share that with other people.
So, I mean, I think you had a quote you wanted to throw at me. It was from Firefly, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you're going to believe, just believe something, right? Something along those lines.
Yeah.
Okay, so that brings us to sort of like the importance of belief and making meaning and things like that. So that's going to be something that in my stream of consciousness series, eventually I'll have an episode on meaning making, and because that's become something that has become really important to me. I think not just because of the field work that you and I are in, but I think also for me it's age, and sort of moving through that era of time as I'm experiencing it. But as when I was in that more empirical status, when I was in that hard science part of my life, I was very exclusionary and very much meaning was there and I could see it, but it didn't really mean anything at the time. I would shut it out as sort of a secondary artifact of reality that was subjective and unmeasurable, and what can I do with that? But then once I got really good at understanding scientific method and things like that, all of a sudden I didn't need all that extra brain space, and all of a sudden I realized that meaning is what was filling that space, and how it's important to have that extra layer, or set of layers, or whichever way it goes, right? I mean, so I guess, life has always been sort of a weird and confusing thing to me, and I try to make sense of it as best as I can as we go along. And certainly sharing in the deep, meaningful relationships that I've had along the way has helped to sort of shape that understanding for me. So I guess when I think of Gnosis, it's like you said at the very beginning, it's undefinable. It's hard to put your finger on. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have any words of wisdom?
um, I did want to bring in dukkha just a little bit, the Buddhist First Noble Truth, just a little. I just wanted to just speak to it because I think it's in Gnosis is part of that, bridging that gap. So dukkha is the gap between what is and what we're able to experience of what is. And some people call it, some people say life is suffering. Some people call it dissatisfaction, or maybe even to thirst, to be thirsty. Like there's this restlessness. I don't know about you, but I'm just always trying to think about, well, what could I change about my life? What could I be doing differently? And part of that is, I think, healthy in that we're trying to grow and evolve, and that's all good. But then I think part of it too is kind of um, it can get out of balance. It can be a distraction. It can keep us from actually growing and become something else that's not healthy or helpful. So I just wanted to include that idea in this discussion because I think Gnosis is, or that we have an opportunity to jump through that gap and actually experience what is that ultimate field of being.
Okay, so I think that's kind of amazing. So for our viewers that aren't Mayhemers and that don't know us, and that probably, if they're lucky to have made it this far into this conversation, um, what are some ways that you found in your life to sort of keep that balance going? Because, like you said, it can get really whopper jawed if you're too focused on those hidden pieces of reality, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Um, Boy, that's a big question. I mean, because anything I might say might not apply to anybody else, but
Well,
because
what's worked for you?
I guess, um, and I'm also Sagittarius, just to self-disclose. So I'm like, I also have my own challenges with, shooting off arrows and not really paying attention to whether they hit the targets. So I do have to put extra care to just keep my eye on the target. And for me, it's an idealistic thing. It's like a calling. So, but I've also heard other people from Mayhem talk about that impulse. What is your impulse? What do you feel pulled toward? There's also that element of magnetism. I was just reading a quote by somebody was attributing to Rumi. I didn't know he was the one that said it, that what you want wants you. There's something in the universe pulling something out of you, like your gift. What is your gift to share the world? That's what I tell people, especially in the past when I worked at psych hospitals with people that were depressed or suicidal or whatever. Everyone has a gift, and the world will be better off if they share it. Just put it out there, whatever that is. And no one can tell anybody else what that is. I mean, we could say, oh, well, you've got this strength or that skill set, or you seem to be good at this, but it may not be what they feel called to do, what they have that impulse to do.
I think that's actually a beautiful message, True. You know, I'm moving toward 40 here, and as I'm going along, I'm developing a new calling as I go. I've kind of crossed into one path that I feel that definitely is meant for me. But once that was sort of locked in and settled, it was kind of like that extra space came back again, and it was like, well, so there's some other things, and what I found is that I'm going way back to when I was young, and I was mostly an artist all of the time, and I'm finding that creative impulse back in me again, and wanting to develop new creative skills, which this podcasting project is a brand new skill for me. So that's kind of, it's resonating. What you're telling me is resonating. Um, What about methods of meditation or prayer that you used that help you to keep those things in balance?
Yeah. So, there's so many different forms of meditation. I think they're all good. They're all helpful. I do want to just put a little snippet out there. If somebody has a trauma history, meditation may not be a good thing for them. Sometimes there's walking meditation. Sometimes there's things that a gift of focus, something to focus on besides just the breath and what floats through the mind. But I've also been doing a lot of centering prayer lately. You actually can get a centering prayer app for your phone. I've been using that. There's been you have these, I've had this experience, I've heard people talk about it too, where you go into a bookstore like Half Price Books or whatever, and a book just almost leaps out off the shelf at you. Like I guess it was the Pilgrim's Way was what it was. And he had this one prayer that he said, the mysterious author that they didn't, it was like an unknown author. He prayed constantly all the time, and he got benefits from it. So sometimes it's just nice to have that affirmation or that cognitive handle that you can focus on, that it's not only, I mean, it may be beneficial in multiple ways, but just to have something to think about whenever you got this stress or that distraction, or maybe even a negative mental habit that you want to correct, to have that affirmation or whatever you want to.
So anything as long as it works at like a mental touchstone, something that you come back to in the dark to find your way back onto your trail or your path or your way back home, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think that we've actually used up all of the time that we intended to tonight. I mean, I think we could probably keep going, but for the sake of our listeners, I think we should probably wrap this one up for now. Maybe we can come back and continue the discussion later. So Mayhemers, you know what to do. Click like, hit subscribe, and all of that kind of stuff. And True, you can go ahead and push the stop recording button now.
Thanks for listening.